Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'm Marina Hatsopoulos. Today, we're going to hear from Boston biotech giant George Scangos, who was formerly the CEO of Biogen and is now CEO of Vir Biotechnology, which IPO'd a month before the pandemic at a $2 billion valuation and is currently valued at over $8 billion, largely based on its work on a COVID drug. If you look on the Vir website, what you see in big letters is a world without infectious diseases. What a statement. Infectious diseases are among the leading cause of death worldwide, and Vir is looking to prevent and treat these diseases, including COVID, hepatitis B, influenza A, HIV, and tuberculosis. The event today is being brought to you by the Hellenic Innovation Network, an outgrowth of MIT Enterprise Forum Greece, which was created with the support of the Greek Consulate of Boston in order to advance technological innovation and entrepreneurship in Greece by leveraging the Greek diaspora. We disseminate Greek startup news to our network. We broadcast educational events like the one today, organize regular meetings of a monthly CEO group, and we host in-person pitching and networking events, which are open to everyone in the community. I'd like to welcome to you now Vasili Papakonstantinou, who is the Vice Chairman of MIT Enterprise Forum Greece. Vasili.
Hi, Marina. Thank you, everybody, for joining this very exciting webcast in our series. With such esteemed guests. A quick update on what MIT Enterprise Forum is doing. We have started the new round of the startup competition with 32 new startups joining the acceleration program. You can look at the website to see their exciting work and prepare for the transformation they're going to have over the course of the program. I also want to invite you to take a look at another initiative, the EIDAP Challenge, which is the first incentive prize competition for the Greek water utility. These are very exciting stuff, and we would like to have you look at it and give your opinion. With further ado, I would like to pass it over to Consul General of Greece, Stratos Efthymiou.
Thank you very much, Vasili and Marina. Your personal efforts are priceless. I want to stress out that the Hellenic Innovation Network is volunteer work. All the network's members, such as Anna Protopapas, whom I would like to thank for moderating today's discussion, are professionals who are helping pro bono, donating their most important asset, time. This year's webinars and events are under the auspices of the Greece 2021 Committee. The 200th anniversary of the Greek Revolution is a historic milestone for Greece. Let's not forget that it was the Greek diaspora abroad that worked for the awakening of the Greek nation through promoting education and literacy. And we have made here a conscious effort to gather this year the best representatives of our community in a series of webinars, promoting entrepreneurship, technological literacy, and celebrating our diaspora and its achievements. And Greeks abroad can show us the way for a new revolution, the revolution of tomorrow, the revolution of innovation, science, and research. I think there is no other person from our scientific community who symbolizes better the expertise and success of the Greek diaspora than George Scangos. George, a Greek American who was born and raised in Lynn, Massachusetts, who always helps Greece through various ways and who makes us proud every day. I want to thank him personally for his time and availability and for having accepted our invitation. And I hope that the situation will improve soon so that he can come to Greece this summer and enjoy his holidays on the island of Scangos. With this, I would like to ask Anna to take the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm excited to welcome George to this panel. George has had a very esteemed career and has a lot to teach us. And maybe, George, nice to see you. I'd like to start with what is really top of mind for all of us. It's been just over a year since we heard about COVID-19 and the situation that was at the time emerging in a far away place in Wuhan. And at this point, we've reached what I think is a horrendous milestone, 100 million people around the world infected. We're close to 500,000 people in the US who have died from this disease. What do you think is how do you see this evolving with vaccines, with new therapies, and more specifically, what is the role that Vir has played and how is it going to impact, hopefully, the light at the end of this tunnel?
Okay, well, thank you, Anna. 10 questions all in one. First of all, let me say I'm very happy to be here. I thank Stratos and Marina for the invitation to talk. It's been a pleasure to get to know both of you, and really happy to be here. Look, the pandemic is scary. Obviously, you read off the statistics about deaths and the number of cases. The vaccines, I think, first of all, it's unbelievable that we have vaccines basically a year after it started, less than a year before they were approved. So Pfizer, BioNTech, the Moderna, others should just get tremendous credit for getting these vaccines forward as quickly as they did. They seem to work surprisingly well. 95% protection is an incredible level of protection for the vaccines. Obviously, there are supply shortages and distribution issues, but those will get solved. And so I think over the course of this year, probably most people who want to get vaccinated will be able to. The issue now is the variants that are arising. You probably read about the UK variant and the South African variant. There are others. There are variants coming out of Brazil. There's a variant here in California. There's a variant that arose in Scotland and one that came from Denmark after the virus went from humans to minks and back to humans. And the question is, to what extent will the vaccines provide protection against those new strains? Most of those strains, from what we know today, still seem to be susceptible to the vaccine, to the immunity induced by the vaccine. The South African strain, maybe less so. And that seems to be because of one particular mutation that's in the South African strain, which is a mutation in amino acid 484 in the spike protein. That mutation now is also showing up in the UK variant. And as more and more people get vaccinated and recover and have some level of immunity, and the virus gets under more selective pressure, the fact that it can evade to some extent will just, let's say, foster the development of more resistant strains. The good news is that, for example, J&J's vaccine in South Africa was only 50% protective in an area where the predominant strain is the South Africa strain. But that was protective against disease. It had a much higher level of protection against severe disease, hospitalization, and death. So hopefully the vaccines won't keep people from getting COVID and transmitting it, but they will keep people from going to the hospital and dying of it. And we may have to, it's unclear how long the vaccination lasts. So we may have to get vaccinated every year. Could be like flu. We also need drugs, not just vaccines. And so, there are many classes of drugs coming forward. Some companies have like oral small molecules. Merck has a promising one. There's another promising one being developed in Israel. And then there are the antibodies, like Vir is developing. Regeneron has antibodies. Lilly has antibodies. Unlike the response to the vaccine, which induces antibodies, but many different kinds of antibodies, the particular antibodies being brought forward by companies recognize one particular spot on the virus. And if that spot changes, then those antibodies are no longer effective. And so my view is like the combination from Lilly They have 2 antibodies. Neither one of them work against the South African strain. So if that strain becomes prevalent, those antibodies no longer will provide any benefit. That's straight from Lilly. Their CEO made that announcement. If you look at Regeneron's antibodies, probably one of them doesn't work against that strain. And as that strain becomes more prevalent, then it's just one mutation away from becoming refractory to both of those. So in terms of the drugs, we need let's say drugs that are going to have staying power, that are effective today and hopefully will be effective a year from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now, because I don't think this is a virus that's going to go away, probably will become endemic. And so what is Vir doing? Well, we began, like those other companies, to isolate antibodies from patients who've recovered from COVID. We thought that we didn't know at the time what the ability was of the virus to mutate, but knowing that many viruses mutate rapidly, we sought antibodies that could have broad coverage and that would cover whatever strains would arise. And so rather than looking in patients who recovered from COVID, we looked in patients who recovered from SARS. Right? Now, SARS is a coronavirus epidemic from a few years ago. The virus is related to COVID, but obviously a different virus. So the thought was an antibody that could prevent infection with SARS and prevent infection with COVID would recognize a part of the virus that was more difficult for the virus to change. That seems to be true. And if you look at the 400,000 or so, 500,000 almost isolates of COVID that have been sequenced, there are only about 20 that change the site to which our antibody binds, as opposed to some number of thousands for the others. And none of those 20 seems to recur very much. So it looks so far like our antibody should be protective. It's in phase 3 different clinical trials now. There's one trial which is actually a combination with one of Lilly's antibodies. So second trial we're doing in newly diagnosed patients early to see if we can prevent hospitalization, death. And the third trial is being done with the US government in hospitalized patients to see if we can prevent or reduce progression to needing ICU, needing oxygen. And we'll have data from all 3 of those within the next few weeks. So we're coming up and we'll see to what extent we can provide a benefit for patients. We've been doing that collaboratively with GSK. And GSK will manufacture and distribute the antibody around the world. We've also been working with GSK on coronavirus vaccines, not on a COVID vaccine, but on a pan-coronavirus vaccine that would cover COVID, variants of COVID, and whatever the next coronavirus epidemic will be. We've made good progress there, and those things I think should be moved forward in the next year or 2. That's a longer term undertaking. And then we've been working with GSK to identify small molecules that can block COVID. So it's a 3-pronged attack. And I think maybe in the next year, we should have some of those that are moving forward into the clinic as well. So that's our Vir. That's our COVID program.
So if I understand correctly, you've anticipated that viruses are really smart. They're going to mutate and are really trying to focus on therapeutics that are maybe a step ahead from these viruses and focus on antibodies that would bind to the more preserved parts of the genome. Is that?
That is correct. And, I have to give credit for that to our Chief Scientific Officer, Skip Virgin, who's an extraordinary viral immunologist, and felt very strongly that antibodies that we developed should be very hard for the virus to evade right from the beginning. Right?
Yeah, that's great. So I know when you started Vir, and is it like 3 years ago now or 2 years ago? I'm trying to remember. A few years ago, you had this very bold vision that you were going to address infectious disease in a big way. And you were able to get a lot of support behind it from the investment community at a time when the rest of the industry was really moving away from infectious disease. And the mantra in some ways was no one can make money in infectious disease. And yet, nobody predicted the pandemic, or there was much less focus on infectious disease. What was your thinking at that time? Obviously, you probably did not predict the pandemic, but were thinking about infectious disease and its importance in the world going forward.
Yeah, well, look, when my last day at Biogen was January 6th, 2017. Right? My first day at Vir was January 7th, 2017. So it's not like I took a lot of time off. But when I started thinking about what I would do next, it wasn't clear to me at all. I had a few discussions with people, or if I would do anything at all, maybe just take life a little easier, sit on some boards. I was speaking initially with a fellow named Bob Nelson, who's the kind of the brainchild behind Vir, about joining the board. But there was a huge vision. And the reason the vision was so big is partly what you said, that there was the common wisdom of the day was you couldn't make money in infectious diseases. That view came from the fact that you cannot make money making new antibiotics, which is a separate issue. It's a terrible issue. We have to figure out how to get around that. But there have been good biotech companies that made good antibiotics and went bankrupt because you really can't make any money. On the other hand, Gilead has shown that you can make a lot of money in infectious diseases if you have good drugs that treat major viral diseases. Much of the pharmaceutical industry had backed away from infectious diseases for the reasons you said. Others were still in it, but they had reduced their activity. So that relative to the need, there was not a lot of activity in the pharma industry. Within the biotech industry, there were a few companies focused on anti-infectives, but they were small, relatively narrowly focused. And so we saw a need for a company to be aggressive because of the huge need for infectious diseases around the world, and an opportunity to become a leading company in the treatment of infectious diseases. And so that was the vision that I found very compelling. The vision was and is to work on diseases that are important for the developed world, but also to work on diseases that are important for the developing world. So TB, malaria, to some extent HIV, and to get funding from other than investors to fund that work, but to make that a major part of what we've done. And so I thought, given that this is the last thing I'll do in my career, maybe it would be a chance to do some real good for the world, to bring hopefully some relief to lots of people around the world who need better care for their diseases. That was the vision. So we started working on vaccines for HIV and TB, and we did that with support from the Gates Foundation. Those programs are still going. We just got our first molecule into clinical development in December for HIV vaccine. We had a big program in due on flu, which kills a lot of people, or did kill a lot of people in the pre-COVID area. It's interesting now, there's less infectious than COVID, so there is no flu now, right? Yeah. But once COVID gets under control, flu will come back. And we had programs on hepatitis B, right? And so we were focused on those diseases, going along. We had raised money, we had programs moving forward, and then COVID came, right? And so last January, we thought we could do something because we had technology in hand that we thought could be very useful. We had a responsibility to do it. I mean, this is a pandemic, and you can see the consequences now. And so we went all in, and we didn't stop doing the other things. We did COVID on top. And so 2020 was a rather intense year for working in the company. But here we are.
That's great. So, George, as obviously Vir is not your first entrepreneurial role, and I know that as I looked at your bio, I think it's marked with a lot of bold moves. You went from academia, if I remember, to biotech, from Bayer to Exelixis, from Biogen back to an earlier stage company. Maybe you can talk a little bit about your career, what your thinking process was when you made those big, bold moves. And I know that a lot of the audience would like to hear what makes a good entrepreneur.
Okay, well, let me take the first part of that. Look, I started my life as an academic scientist. I got a PhD, did a postdoc, was on the faculty at Hopkins. While I was at Hopkins, my postdoc advisor started a little biotech company, and I became a consultant for that company. And so once a month, I would travel there and work on them. They asked me to take a leave from the university and come and set up some technology in the company, which I did because I thought it was interesting. And also there were some things about university life, at least my situation at university, that I found less than optimal. And so I took a year leave. I went there and I ended up staying in that little biotech company. That was the transition from academia to industry. That was one move that most of my colleagues thought was crazy. The view at the time was that the only people who were unsuccessful academically would move to industry. And so there was a stigma attached to it. But I was having a good academic career, so that wasn't the case. But I found it compelling to actually do interesting science really for the purpose of making drugs. So that company got acquired by Bayer, big pharma company. I worked there for a decade. And I had a good career, there. And then, but again, after 10 years, I started to get dissatisfied with the pharma companies because it's so process driven that in many cases, the process trumped the content. So your ideas were not as important as how you were able to navigate the politics and get them through, which I found really crazy and a road to mediocrity. And so I started thinking about leaving. And then I met Stelios Papadopoulos, who I'm sure most people know who are listening to the call. I think Stelios may be on the line, who was a driver together with Spiros Argivanis, was driving the formation of a new company, which was Exelixis. And I had many conversations with Stelios over some period of months while I hemmed and hawed about the decision to leave a secure job and a successful career in a large company and come to this crazy startup doing research in fruit flies, right? And, eventually Stelios convinced me to make the move. Stelios was chairman of Exelixis. He had to use all his powers of coercion. And I won't go into all the details, but I ended up moving to Exelixis. Stelios was chair. I was CEO, stayed there for 14 years. So that was a good time. I learned a lot during that period. And then, after 14 years, that's a long time, right? And so I also had the opportunity to become CEO of Biogen. Was an interesting company at the time, with an interesting company now as well, but had some issues then. Somebody gave me advice that, since Biogen is one of the premier biotech companies, that if you get the offer to be CEO, it's not a job offer, it's an intelligence test. You should just say yes and take it. Right? And so I did that. Stelios also is chair of Biogen. So we worked together for several more years. So look, each, and then it came to Vir. So each of those moves was a little different from a career path that many people take. I never had a grand vision for my career. Even working in Bayer, when and people would have discussions with me about what my career path would be, my view was always, well, I have a job. I'm going to do this job as well as I can do it. And then, I would, if you recognize me for doing a good job and give me some bigger job, that's great. If I screw up, it doesn't matter what you tell me today. Whatever your plans are for the future aren't going to come to pass. So I think I was fortunate to meet and work with incredibly talented people, and so that I had some options in my life. And the goal for me is to make a difference, to bring drugs that will help people in need. I think that's the whole purpose behind the healthcare industry, right? We're all working to improve the lives of people who desperately need better therapies. And so when things start to get in the way of that, then it's your job either to get rid of those things and move them aside, or to find a different situation where you don't have those. And so large companies, small companies, all have strengths and weaknesses. What we're trying to do at Vir, which is much bigger than most startups and has attracted, I think, probably more sophisticated people than most startups, is to see if we can do some of each, to have kind of the depth of knowledge, expertise that you have in a larger company, with the less bureaucracy, less process that just comes with size. And so being somewhat smaller, we can have less of that. And so we'll see. But part of the goal of coming to Vir was to see if we could take the best characteristics of each and put them together.
So for all, there's a lot of aspiring Greek entrepreneurs trying to build companies in Greece. And I know you've spent a lot of time in your personal time in Greece. I know you've been involved in a foundation that sponsors Greek research in the life sciences. And I understand you're on a recently formed working group with Stelios that is drafting proposals for the government on how to attract investment. So what advice do you have both to the entrepreneurs themselves that want to make a go at it in Greece, as well as to the government that wants to make Greece an area of investment and build an ecosystem, hopefully something that comes somewhere close to what we have in Boston or San Francisco?
Yeah, look, coming close to Boston or San Francisco is a huge challenge, right? Because of the infrastructure that both of those cities have, and the experience and everything that's set up there. Even other regions of the US have difficulty in replicating what exists in those two places. But look, in general, three things matter, I think, in the biotech industry. It's quality of the work. Yeah, you have to do world-class work. It can't be the best work in San Francisco or the best work in Athens or Thessaloniki. It has to be, among the best in the world. Speed matters, and cost matters. Right? And so, for entrepreneurs in Greece, and my view is you have to be realistic. What is it that a company in Greece could be among the best in the world at doing? Right? And my experience with young Greek scientists, they're incredible scientists there, really good people, smart people working under difficult circumstances without many resources. So there's not a shortage of capable people. There is a shortage of financing. There's a shortage of experience. It's not enough, as you know, to do good science. You have to have people who know how to translate that science into products, right? And you have to have the various kinds of infrastructure there. So it'd be very hard to replicate all of that in Greece. There are some things that I think can be done extraordinarily well in Greece. So if you think about machine learning, artificial intelligence, which you cannot do modern biological research without sophisticated data sciences attached to it. You don't need fancy labs to do that. It can be done from anywhere. Our data sciences people don't sit in San Francisco, they're scattered. And so I think there's a real opportunity to do things there. There are competitions that are sponsored. For example, MIT sponsors competitions for companies who think they have machine learning algorithms that can predict what kinds of chemical structures would interact with a given protein and be inhibitors of it. Those competitions occur frequently, and so they can be entered by anyone, and winning one of those competitions or placing high in one of those competitions gets attention. Right? And so that's one thing I think is relatively straightforward. I know Stelios has been leading a group to work with the Greek government to identify things that could be done in Greece. I think one of the things that is coming out of there is manufacturing. You see it now with COVID. The thing that's going to limit the use of COVID antibodies is the ability to produce them. Right? And you need, given the number of people that might need the antibodies, the production capacity is insufficient. We're struggling, everybody's struggling to make enough antibodies. And frankly, the capacity just doesn't exist in the world, given all the other biological products that are being made. There's not spare capacity enough to make COVID antibodies. And for companies like Vir, and there are many other biotech companies that are not large enough to have their own manufacturing plants, they have to contract out that manufacturing. So those contract plants tend to be, there are some in the US, but not many actually. They tend to be in Asia and Europe. And so in Asia, Singapore, South Korea, Shanghai all have good manufacturing plants. In Europe, it's mainly in Ireland and Switzerland. And the reason it's in Ireland and Switzerland is because both of those countries have given substantial tax breaks to companies who place their manufacturing there. Right? And so, you need for manufacturing facilities for biologics, you need land, you need water, you need a trained workforce, and you need an efficient approval process, so you can get approval and begin building quickly. And then you need a favorable tax structure. So all those things could be possible in Greece and could be the nucleus of a thing. So I think that's been Stelios' thought. I think it's a good one, as a good place to focus. And so those plants range anywhere from, having 1,000 liter capacity to having 150,000 liter capacity. So all different scales, could start small, build up. So I think those are two areas that are interesting for Greece.
Because it's also the type of manufacturing that requires highly skilled operators, and I think the educational system in Greece is substantial enough to be able to train those folks.
it needs people sophisticated in biology and engineering, right? And process, controls. And so it takes a variety of skill sets. It's not a low-tech manufacturing thing. It's a very high-tech, which requires a lot of skilled labor. I think Greece has that, right?
So George, we have a question from one of the audience, Konstantinos Drosatos. He's asking, infectious disease is a threat that healthcare systems have to deal with a lot going forward. What needs to change in Greece so they can join the biotechnology efforts aiming to tackle this threat? So you've talked about the manufacturing, but is there anything else that can be done?
Yeah, well, the other area where Greece probably could be competitive is in clinical development.
Yeah.
Right? That when we do clinical trials, our COVID trials are going on in the US, Brazil, Chile, the UK, Spain, France, not Greece. Right? Greece has a national health system, good records. When you start a clinical trial, you have to get approval from ethics committees, every country, and sometimes every site will have a committee to assure themselves that the trial is ethically and people are being treated appropriately, appropriate safety measures are being followed. If Greece had a national system so that you could, begin trials in all of the hospitals with one of those approvals, that would facilitate things. That would help, and I think it would make Greece a more attractive place to start to do clinical trials. Because the quality of the medical care is good, and I think that's probably the second area where Greece could play a role. The third area, the basic science. It's not that there aren't good scientists in Greece. There are. It's just the infrastructure to turn that science, to make a company to turn that science into products, is really difficult, and it'd be difficult to compete with the massive expertise that exists in other places, I think.
We have another question, which is more of a scientific question, from George Kouduris. He's saying, I was wondering if HLA type is relevant to the infection or the progression of COVID.
Yeah, it's unclear whether it's clearly not just HLA. It's unclear if HLA, haplotypes have some impact on the development of COVID and in fact who gets a mild case versus a serious case. We and others have looked at immune responses in both patients who've had mild cases and serious cases. There are differences. You can find transcriptional differences in lymphocytes, and it's complicated. And there are patterns, however, that correlate with severe disease. And we're trying to sort those out, but HLA may have a role, but it's way more complicated than just HLA.
So I have a question that is a more personal question, George. I know you grew up in a Greek immigrant family, I think here in Massachusetts, even though you're now a California resident. And is there anything about growing up in a Greek immigrant family that prepared you for a successful career combining science, business leadership, and entrepreneurship?
I thought about that question a lot. That's an interesting question. It's interesting to me that if you look in the healthcare industry, there in the senior leadership roles, I think there's a disproportionate number of Greek people, and so I think there is something in the Greek culture that sparks an interest in science and questioning and the scientific method and in math, engineering. you know, when I was a kid, there are a number of things. We were poor, right? And we were an immigrant family, lived in, you know, tenements, basically. And so I grew up knowing lots, being, I mean, we weren't poor in the sense we didn't have enough food, right? We always had enough to eat, but we didn't have any luxuries and nothing. And so, and everybody else I knew was in the same boat. So, you know, I was hungry. And my parents, you know, were working incredibly hard so that I could have a better life. Right? And I saw that there was a better life eventually. You know, when I grew up my first few years really in a Greek neighborhood and didn't speak English, spoke only Greek. But you know, once I got older and you know, got exposed to middle-class Americans, I saw that there were opportunities that that many people didn't have. And so one of the great things about America then, maybe less true now, but hopefully still true to some extent, is that there, you know, it is meritocracy, and you have opportunities, and I did get them. And you know, and then thinking about my dad would always ask me questions when I was a kid, you know, and many of the questions my first reaction was, how the hell would I know that? Of course, I would never say that to my dad, but he was getting me to think about things and reason things out. And so he was fostering a sense of curiosity, not accepting the obvious, thinking a little more detail about things. And that's a skill set that many people should have these days, just applying it to what they read, but thinking about, you know, that's a scientific mindset, being a little iconoclastic, not taking things on face value, reasoning them out, trying to get to what's really important, get to the key questions, and then answer those questions. So I think there was a huge impact in those things.
Yeah, no, the questioning is so important now that we have so much more information at our tips, and it's easy to just take it at face value.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, we have actually the same amount of information, or less information than there are statements. So you can, yeah.
So I think we have another question from Stratos, who's asking, what is your impression of the Greek response to COVID-19?
I think it was remarkable, right? That Greece paid attention to the science, made medically sophisticated judgments about what the right thing to do was, and the government had the courage to institute, for example, lockdowns at a time when it was really needed, despite the fact that it was obviously going to impact the economy that was beginning to recover from all the years of austerity. And so I thought, to me, it is a model. What Greece did is a model for what the rest of the world should have done, to base their response on good scientific and medical analysis, to have the courage to do what's necessary. And so, you know, at the beginning, Greece had a remarkably low rate of COVID. They did a great job. Impossible to contain that forever. So Greece, I think, now is suffering like everybody else, but again, now has the courage to do what it takes to bring that under control. So I wish the US had done as well as Greece. Obviously, we did not. Anyway, I think it's been remarkable. So government deserves huge credit for how they handled the pandemic.
It might also be a respect for science. I understand that on a daily basis, the scientific leaders would be on TV every day, updating the population, and that ability to respect and listen to science, that unfortunately we've seen some deterioration of that in the US. And hopefully we'll get it back going forward.
Yeah. Yes, hopefully.
So there is another question, again, a more scientific, technical question, George. It says, what is the importance of AI in drug discovery, and what you expect from efforts like AlphaFold from Google's DeepMind?
Yeah, look, the importance of AI is and machine learning is everywhere, you know. And now let's start at the very beginning. If you want to understand a disease process and therefore know where to intervene with the drug, you can do that now very quickly by knocking every gene out one by one with CRISPR, right? And then testing whether or not that has an impact. Or you can activate every gene one by one. You can scan the whole genome in a couple of weeks. And what you get is a number of genes. When you do that maybe 20 or 30 times on different tests, you get this huge mass of information. It is way too complicated to decipher. And so if you can only make sense out of that with very sophisticated machine learning algorithms that can organize those findings for you. And so right at the beginning on gene identifying targets, it's important. Once you have a target, and you want to find some molecule that interacts with that target, whether it's a small molecule or an antibody or an RNA drug, whatever. It used to be brute force. You would just screen millions to find something that happened to work. Computational methods now, there are pretty good algorithms where if you have a few compounds that actually interact, the algorithms can then predict and help you get to the ultimate drugs faster. Selecting the right population. You know, when I said there are transcriptional patterns that can predict whether someone will have a mild or severe course of COVID, those are not obvious, and they don't pop out unless you have very sophisticated algorithms that can parse meaningful information out of a huge background of noise. And then patient selection in clinical trials, how you analyze the clinical trials. So everything we do is facilitated and sped up by sophisticated data sciences, machine learning. So it's everywhere. It's all through the processes. Google's AlphaFold, you know, I think that's helpful. It's an incredible tour de force, what they did, probably something only Google can do. It's helpful, but there are so many other important issues as well that it's not by itself an answer.
Yeah. I must say personally, I recognize the value with all the information. It's come a long way from maybe where you started with doing gene by gene transgenic mice and getting very slow amounts of information. But the complexity of it for someone who's not a mathematician or an AI person like myself can be overwhelming. But I can understand the power and the need for it given the data we're generating. So we have a question from Maria Sakas. She says, you have been clear that stellar science is necessary to make good drugs. Can a company afford the time and money to do basic science, or should we be leveraging academia for partnerships?
Oh, both. That's a really good question. You have to have world-class science, right? Otherwise you're, well, anyway, I think it's mediocrity if you don't. Most of the world-class science will be done outside of the company, right? And so the company has to have interactions and collaborations. So much good science is done in academia. Most of the really good science is done in academia. But you need really good scientists internally to interact with the really good scientists in academia, and so that they are peers, and the work is done as a true collaboration. So the company has to have really good scientists doing thoughtful work. They have to be able to publish it so that the company and the scientists in the company become part of the academic community. And therefore, the collaborations with the academic community can be are easier and are done on a basis of mutual respect, and because each party brings something to the table. So you need both the science in the company, but that you have to have collaboration with academia. You know, we did that at Biogen. We have lots of collaboration, academic collaborations at Vir with universities. You know, our scientists have published, I don't know how many papers in the past few months on COVID in really good journals. Very few of those have been only Vir scientists. Almost always they are jointly authored with people at various universities.
And actually, as we think about Greek universities, I think that the idea that it's okay to collaborate with companies and to partner is not yet fully ingrained in the academic culture, in the Greek academic community, and it's probably something that will need to change over time as well.
Yes, I think that's really important, and that's also true. And if you look at even if you look at the U.S., you know, there are regions, Boston and San Francisco, where if you're a professor at one of the universities there and you haven't been involved in a startup company, people think there must be something wrong. There are other parts of the country where it's discouraged and still thought to be, you know, tainting the purity of academic science, right? So to the extent that that attitude still exists in Greece, it's going to hold things back, right? Because, you know, if one interacting with industry can be a source of funding, it can be a source of access to technologies and capabilities that the academic lab might not have. And so it can bring lots of benefits. The fear is that then there'll be restrictions on the publication and people get taken advantage of. Those can all be handled contractually. So I think it's critically important that those attitudes change. Right?
Yeah, no, it's important step. So we have a question from Alex Caris. Sounds like it's a good question that might allow us, that might lead to wrap up the session. The question is, what can members of the Greek diaspora do to help Greek scientists in Greece?
Well, I would come back to the Fondation Santé, which is, you know, an organization, again, started by Stelios with Spiros Argilanis, which provides funding for Greek scientists. There are so many deserving Greek scientists who are inadequately funded. And so the Fondation raises money specifically for the support of young Greek scientists in Greece. The quality of the applications that come in, and Spiros organizes the applications from the scientists come in, that's a grant application. Spiros has assembled an incredibly eminent panel of people to review those applications. There are always so many more meritorious ones than the foundation can actually fund. And so there's a huge need. So I would say we can contribute, literally make contributions to the Fondation for the support of the science in Greece. And, you know, encourage other people to do so as well. You know, there are, and then there are other things to do, you know, like young Greek scientists probably could benefit from spending a year or two abroad, right? And working in Europe or working in the US, and they need some financial support to do that. And they might need some mentoring in order to know what to do. So, you know, over the years, I've had a few young Greek scientists come work. They are extraordinarily good people, good scientists, and you get as much from them or more than they get from you. So it's not a one-way street, just doing them a favor. They are able to contribute meaningfully. So support along those lines also would be great.
Great. Good. I think, George, I want to thank you. I know we have had a great audience. It's great to hear about your career, your contributions, not only to the COVID and the anti-infectives and the drug development field, but your specific contributions to the Greek world as well. And I hope the next time I see you, it's one of those wonderful biotech conferences that Stelios organizes in Greece. We missed it this year, but look forward to seeing you in Greece next year.
I hope so. And I'm thinking about what I'm going to do after I'm vaccinated. Go to Greece is high on the list. So.
Great. Thank you. And thanks everyone for listening in.
Thanks, everybody.